I'm Bryony and I work for UVM Extension. I work on pests and parasites and also beneficial organisms in pasture ecosystems. So today I'm going to talk about dung ecology and pasture insect management. So I'll just give you an introduction to dung ecology to begin with. And then I'm going to talk about some of our grazed pasture research that we've been doing over the past 4 years now in Vermont. Firstly, talking about dung beetles for pasture health, and then moving on to talk about integrated pest management for pasture pest flies, which is a project we did last summer. The summer just gone. So this is a cow pat. You'll all be aware how important this is for pasture health. It contains all of the major plant nutrients, a whole host of micronutrients, and is the biggest contributor to soil organic matter in grazed pasture ecosystems. It also emits greenhouse gases, so carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So it's really important that they're down into the soil as quickly as possible so that we can utilize all of those important nutrients and stop the sort of emission of those greenhouse gases. And the way that happens is through the dung ecosystem, so all of the organisms that live in a dung pat. And this is showing you all of the different invertebrates that live there. There's also microorganisms and fungi, but I'm going to talk about just the insects today. So firstly, we have our nuisance organisms, which is what people might think of first when we think about manure. We have pest flies that breed in dung pats. We also have parasitic nematodes, intestinal parasites of cattle. Part of their life cycle is through the manure out on the pasture. Aside from this, we also have a load of beneficial invertebrates. So we have coprophagous insects, and that means that they eat poop. So they live, eat, and breed in the manure. And then we have predatory invertebrates. They might not live there all the time, they might just be visiting, and they don't actually eat the dung. They go around the manure pat and are carnivorous, so they will eat other insects. And that's important because a lot of these species are known to eat pest fly eggs and larvae and other pests and parasites in the dung. So they're really important at stopping the transmission of pests and parasites. Finally, we have our ecosystem engineers. Earthworms are obviously have a very big role in decomposition and important for the soil health in pastures. And then we have dung beetles. Dung beetles are really important in physically relocating that cow patty down into the soil. And I'll talk about that in more detail. I just wanted to show you some pictures of some of these bugs because I think they're really cool. So these are predators and parasitoids. These two are predatory beetles that we find in the manure. These are beneficial flies, which have stages that might be predatory as well. The adult of this yellow dung fly is predatory, and the larvae of this flesh fly are predatory. And then our parasitoids. This is a parasitoid wasp, and you might have heard of these. You can release them. They're called fly predators, and they parasitize pest fly pupae. There's a picture here of a rove beetle that's covered up by that, but that is also a parasitoid. They will lay their eggs inside the pest fly pupae, and the larvae will develop and eat the pest fly larvae. And so out of this pupae, instead of an adult pest fly emerging, it will be one of these wasps or one of these beetles. And then we have the coprophagous beetles and flies. So here we have our dung beetles. These little red beetles are dung beetles. And then in this picture on the right, there's a load of different types of dung beetles. This picture shows golden dung flies. As I said, the larvae of those will eat the dung. And then soldier flies, you might have heard of the black soldier fly. The larvae of those, which are these underneath, can process a massive amount of organic matter and very quickly. They're really important in sort of processing this and getting it back down into the soil. You might be surprised to hear that we have dung beetles, although I'm sure a lot of you know that already. In Vermont, some people are not aware of that. They are quite small, they're not like the ones that we see on TV. So you can see them in the palm. There's about 90 species in North America, and they are in decline globally for a lot of the same reasons that many insects are declining: pesticide use and habitat loss, etc. But these are all pictures of beetles that we might find in Vermont. The ones on the left here are tunneling beetles. So they will colonize the manure patty and then make tunnels underneath it down into the soil. And they drag the manure down into their tunnels to eat it and to lay their eggs in it. So you can see they're really important in physically moving that dung down into the soil. And then this one is a dung dwelling beetle. And they don't make tunnels, but they just live in the manure patty and break it up and fragment it and get it ready for other organisms like earthworms to bring those final fragments down into the soil. We did the first survey of dung beetles in Vermont in 2022, and I just wanted to show you some pictures of beetles that we found. So these were all collected in Vermont. We collected 7,000 dung beetles and other dung insects. So this is a predatory beetle, a staphylinid or a rove beetle that we found in our traps. And we found 20 different species. 11 of those, oh yeah.
Sorry, and then maybe we're just going to get to the 9 introduced.
Yeah, a lot of the species that we found, introduced species from Europe.
Farmers bring them in.
I think they came over on the ships in like the ballast and stuff.
Okay,
and,
so
yeah.
long time ago.
Yes,
Yeah.
so not intentionally, accidental introductions, but they are very successful in grazed pastures. The native species that we have here are more suited to woodland, they like trees. So that's one of the ways that we can encourage native species is by integrating some trees into our pastures. But I'll talk a bit later about that as well. And then we had 9 tunneling species and 11 dwelling species. I forgot to bring these handouts, but if anyone's interested, we made some sort of identification sheets of all the different species. And if you come and find me, I can send you them or tell you how to access them online. So sorry about that. I meant to bring. Yeah, so this process of dung decomposition is wholly reliant on all of these beneficial invertebrates. Studies have shown that if you exclude insects from manure patties, they put wire mesh cages over them, and they're still there a whole year later. Weathering alone will not bring this back down into the soil quickly and efficiently like we need to. This provides a lot of pasture ecosystem services related to dung decomposition, obviously nutrient cycling, pasture fertility and soil health, improving the hydrological properties of the soil. Those tunneling beetles, obviously making those tunnels are going to help water infiltration. And then pest, fly and livestock parasite control, as I mentioned. And they also have inherent value for biodiversity on your farms, and they are prey items for other organisms, bats, birds, and small mammals as well. Okay, so that's a dive into dung ecology. I'm going to talk about some of our grazed pasture research now. And firstly, we wanted to focus on the relationships between dung beetles and pasture health. This 2022, we worked with 29 grazing dairy farms across Vermont and some in upstate New York as well. And we measured a whole load of different things. I'll focus mainly on the dung beetles. This is a dung beetle trap. We make these artificial cow patties out of fresh manure and put it on this sort of wire mesh, and underneath there is a buried bucket. The beetles will smell the dung, fly in and fall into the bucket. And you can see a beetle there that we caught. That's a nice geotrupid beetle. We measured soil health, the Cornell cache analysis in these pastures. And then we also measured internal parasites of cattle by doing, and that says pest flies under there, pest flies emerging from these cow patties as well. This is the results, the relationships between dung beetles and soil health. Up the side, we have dung beetle biodiversity, and then along the bottom, we have different soil health indicators. This is soil organic matter, the second one is nitrogen, and the third one is bulk density, which is obviously a measure of soil compaction. And you can see here that dung beetle biodiversity was positively correlated. The higher the dung beetle biodiversity, the higher the soil organic matter, and the same for nitrogen. Then for bulk density, the higher the dung beetle biodiversity, the lower the bulk density, the lower the soil compaction. And that sort of makes sense as we've been discussing, those tunneling dung beetles bringing the organic matter nutrients down into the soil, at the same time those tunnels reducing compaction. Oh, yeah.
The density, how did you measure that? How far from the actual dung, from the manure spot was that?
So we just measured, it wasn't like directly below a manure patty or anything. We wanted to measure just generally in the field. So we did 3 random locations within the field. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that the depth of those, the extent that they go to, or?
No, most of the species will be maximum 4 to 6 inches. Sorry. And then other species, like the geotroopids, the bigger ones, can go down to 3 foot. But we actually only measured up to 4 inches. So there's more to be investigated there. Yeah, so this is dung beetles. Oh, do you have another question?
Yeah, sometimes the manure is in nice patties, other times it's thin and spread out.
Yeah.
Was that at all analyzed and thought about?
No, not. That can depend on a load of things to do with the consistency of the manure and whether birds have been at it. So we didn't specifically look at that. Yeah, so this shows dung beetle abundance up the side and then pest fly abundance along the bottom and then gastrointestinal parasites of cattle on this other graph. And these are both significant negative correlations. So the more dung beetles there were, the fewer pest flies there were, and also the sort of lower fecal egg counts the cows had. And this is something that's known previously already, so dung beetles can really help to stop the gastrointestinal worm larvae from developing in the manure patties. And again, that makes sense. So the dung beetles are competing for the dung resource, so removing the breeding site from pests and parasites, and then those predatory insects are directly predating them. I just wanted to do a quick tangent on control strategies. So these are some transmission cycles for common in worms and flies on pastures. And conventional treatments are aimed at targeting these transmission cycles in or on the cow. Things like ivermectin, insecticides for pest flies, etc. They will be aimed to kill the worms in the cow or kill the flies when they land on the cow. When we're thinking about promoting beneficial insects to help to suppress these transmission cycles, we are thinking about how we can stop these cycles out on the pasture ecosystem outside of the cow. Veterinary parasiticides are very effective, that's why they're used, but they do have some negative environmental impacts. I just wanted to mention they're designed to be insecticidal, but when we treat the animal, they actually pass out in the dung, and 90% of that dose can come out in the manure unchanged. We're essentially having insecticides in the manure, and that can have a knock-on impact on these beneficial insects. Yeah.
And maybe this is outside of the purview of the study, but is there any information on treating with the parasiticide and then how long the half-life is inside that animal? Can you keep it in the barnyard, let it defecate, and then put it out to pasture and not impact?
Yeah, so they're excreted, it trails off over a few weeks, which is not ideal for keeping them in the barn. But I think most of it is excreted within a week. And you can think about minimizing what's going out there. Development of resistance. So there are globally populations of worms and pest flies that are resistant to these treatments now. And then organic producers obviously are very restricted and can't use a lot of these treatments anyway. That's why we're thinking about integrated pest and parasite management for these sort of pasture. And that brings me to pest flies. You can see it's got a lot of face flies there. And this project has come out of farmers over the past few years and realizing that pest fly management is one of the biggest issues for grazing animals. For the rest of this talk, I will discuss some of the results from our IPM for Pasture pest fly study. I'll just give you an overview of the main pest flies out on pastures. We have corn flies, they are biting flies and they are blood feeding. And they're usually found on the side and the back, and when it's hot, they go under the belly of the animal. They're quite small, and you can see them on the side, those little black dots, hopefully. And they can transmit mastitis between animals. Then we have face flies. So these are non-biting flies, and they feed on mucus secretions from the eyes and the nose. Obviously found on the face, and they're a lot larger than horn flies, so they're about twice the size, and they can transmit pink eye between animals. And then finally, stable flies, they're more of a premise fly, so they breed in like bedding and stuff, but we do find them out on the pasture, so I wanted to include them. They are also blood feeding, they're found mostly on the legs, and they can also transmit mastitis and act as a vector for other diseases, so they can be quite nasty. And this is our method. So we worked with 25 farms across Vermont and New York State. 10 were organic and 15 were conventional. And we did fly counts every 2 weeks on cattle through the months of May to September. And at each visit, we counted the numbers of horse flies, face flies, and stable flies on 10 randomly selected cows from the herd. I just wanted to look at the organic farms versus the conventional farms first. These figures show horn fly abundance up the side there, and this one is face fly abundance, and whether the farm was organic or not on the bottom. And these gold bars show the economic threshold. The fly populations above those levels are when we want to be thinking about treating to stop economic losses. We can see that for both horn flies and face flies, there were significantly more flies on cows on organic compared to conventional farms, and the economic thresholds were more often exceeded. That just highlights how difficult it can be for organic producers to control these fly populations, and we need to be thinking about sort of other methods to help out that. Firstly, looking at the organic farms that we're using different fly management strategies. This is horn fly abundance up the side, and then farms that we're using no management strategies, essential oils in the middle there, or releasing parasitoid wasps, so those fly predators. And you can see there were significantly fewer horn flies on cows on the farms that were using essential oils or parasitoid wasps compared to flies using no fly management strategies. So that is encouraging that these alternative strategies can help to suppress fly numbers and to put them generally below the economic threshold levels. However, for face flies and for stable flies, neither of those strategies significantly reduced populations. And particularly for face flies, populations on all of these organic farms were above the economic thresholds. Stable flies, less of an issue, they're always below the threshold anyway. So moving on to look at conventional farms, in the study there were farms that used no fly management strategies again, farms that used Clarifly, so that's a feed-through insecticide, so like a feed additive, or pyrethroids, and pyrethroids are what's in the common fly sprays and borons as well. So again, we have corn fly abundance up the side here and face flies there. You can see that the Clarifly, so the feed additive insecticide, significantly reduced corn fly and face fly counts on cattle. Pyrethroids did not significantly reduce the fly numbers compared to farms using no management strategies. That was very interesting and indicates that we are seeing resistance developing to that very commonly used insecticide. Stable flies, both of those treatments seem to reduce the numbers. However, again, they're generally below the thresholds anyway. Also, on conventional farms, horn fly abundance did seem to be below economic thresholds regardless. Not the case, again, for face flies, so more often they are above the economic threshold. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about grazing management. So these figures show the grazing management that the farm was using. So the first one is whether the cows were in the barn or not when we visited. And then we have continuous grazing, rotational grazing, or management intensive rotational grazing. And there were significantly fewer horn flies and face flies when the cows were in the barn. Then looking at the grazing strategies, there were significantly fewer horn flies and face flies on cows that were grazing rotationally compared to continuously grazed pastures. So that's interesting. It's not something that we've seen before. Flies are good dispersers, so we expect them to just follow the herd even if they're rotating. But that is quite encouraging that rotational grazing may have a role in keeping fly numbers down. Stable flies were highest inside the barn. That makes sense, as I mentioned, they're more of a premise fly. I just wanted to quickly, I know I'm running out of time, mention some other experiences. So this is a groomer scratcher with essential oils in the tank. That seemed to be a really great setup for this organic farm. The cows loved using it. Essential oils evaporate very quickly, so this is a really good way of getting them to reapply it to themselves. And it's on this metal frame, so it can be dragged around with the rotation. And in here was minerals and garlic salt. So I just thought this was a really great setup. Horse and deer flies can be very nasty as well. They have primitive mouth cuts that sort of slash the skin and lap the blood up, and you can see the spilt blood there. So they can really bother animals. And we did a mini study comparing some of these traps, and we found that the horse pal was a really good inexpensive, no mess, easy to move around, a trap that worked really well. Okay, so with no fly management strategies, the economic thresholds for hall flies and taste flies were generally exceeded on organic farms. On conventional farms, face fly populations again were usually pretty high. Essential oils and parasitoid wasps, or those fly predators, were effective at reducing horn flies. Strategies for face fly control are desperately needed. Putting the cows in the barn was a very effective way to reduce fly pressure. Sometimes when we got to the farm, they had put them in the barn to give them a break from the flies, and that really does seem to work. So sort of as a very quick strategy to give the cows a break, that does seem a winner. Rotational grazing seemed to reduce fly pressure compared to continuous grazing. And resistance to pyrethroids, so those common sprays and porons, might be observed in Vermont and New York State fly populations. This is my final slide. I just wanted to mention some dung beetle friendly practices. So grazing for as long as possible. Dung beetles emerge quite early in the spring, so they need some resources out there. So extending the grazing season to provide dung beetles with resources for as long as possible is great. And then minimizing the use of those treatments and focusing on integrated pest management, such as grazing management or those alternative strategies. And finally, as I mentioned, integrating trees to support native dung beetle species.